Okay, well, hi everybody. We are super excited to have Eric Liu joining us today. Eric is the co-founder and CEO of Citizen University. He also directs the Aspen Institute Citizenship and American Identity program. He is the author of several acclaimed books, his most recent being Become America, Civic Sermons on Love, Responsibility, and Democracy. Eric has also served as White House speechwriter for President Bill Clinton, and later as the President's Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor. He was later appointed by President Obama to serve on the board of the Corporation for National and Community Service. Welcome, Eric.
So great to be with you both.
We're so excited and grateful that you wanted to do this. So we just wanted to start off by asking you about Citizen University, what it is, how it came to be.
Sure. So Citizen University is a nonprofit based in Seattle and doing work all around the United States. And our work is about trying to build a culture of powerful, responsible citizenship. And I can unpack all of that, but the bottom line for our work, we have programs that are, some of which are oriented around getting young people engaged and in shaping community and exercising their voice. Other programs that are really about bringing together people who might not know each other into a community to make meaning and make sense together of the times that we're living through right now. And in all of our work, we have this idea that a strong democracy requires strong citizens, that it's not about presidents only, it's not about what happens in DC only, it's about how we learn to show up and how we actually build the muscle and cultivate the spirit to show up. And we have this kind of simple equation that we sometimes use in talking about citizenship, which is this: power plus character equals citizenship. That to live like a citizen, and we're not talking about, by the way, documentation status and legal passport holding and so forth. We mean citizen in the deepest sense that I know you both do in your work, and that is about the kind of ethical sense of being a member of the body, right? A contributor to community, wherever you're from, whatever your papers are, however you may come to be in this country. And that power plus character means that you have to both be fluent in power to understand how stuff gets done, who decides what gets done, how you change things, how you move money and ideas and people and so forth to change things in civic life. But you have to couple that understanding of power with a grounding in civic character, by which we mean simply having the values and the ethics of a non-sociopath, of someone who's not just thinking about themselves and not just thinking about the here and now and immediate gratification. But what does it mean to live like somebody who is woven into a fabric of obligation with other people, who's preceded by folks who came here before and for whom we've got to steward stuff for people coming up like you two in the next generation, right? And so all of our work at Citizen University is about teaching power, cultivating character in a way that's across generations.
Wow, that's amazing. And what type of student do you look for at Citizen University?
Yeah, so we don't even use the word student because our use of the idea of university, we're not literally a degree granting 4-year baccalaureate institution. We are, you can think of it as like a people's university, right? And so we think about the people we engage as catalysts, actually. And the catalysts who we work with really run an incredible range. So in a couple of our programs, like our youth collaboratory program, we work with high school students from around the United States who over the course of a year spend time with us and with each other as a cohort, learning about power, creating their own power projects in their schools and in their communities to figure out, how can I change something specific? It might be busing policy in my neighborhood, or it might be figuring out why my block is in a food desert, or what might be something about how we can activate immigrant families to care about climate change and so forth. And so that's one group of our catalysts, that's young people. But then it runs the gamut. We have another program called Civic Saturdays, which you can think of as gatherings that are essentially a civic analog to a faith gathering. It's not church, it's not synagogue or mosque, but it has kind of the feel and the vibe and the flow of a faith gathering where you invite people in and people will meet strangers and talk about a common question. We'll sing together. We'll hear readings of texts that you might think of as civic scripture, right? Texts that maybe are super well known or maybe you've never heard of before, but they have something to say about the promise of what we're supposed to be doing together in this country. There's a civic sermon that anchors the gathering. And then people form up into circles afterwards to figure out, okay, we've been motivated, we've been inspired, we've been challenged or provoked. Now what are we going to do? How are we going to show up in Seattle or in Albuquerque or in Athens, Tennessee, or wherever it might be? And the catalysts who come to Civic Saturdays are of all ages, all races, all political backgrounds. Some of these happen in tiny rural towns in deep in red, political country. Others happen in big cities where everybody's progressive. Others are in very mixed spaces. And so we define the catalysts and the people we're trying to train and activate as people who are more than interested bystanders, people who want to kind of step off the sidelines and figure out how they can get into the work itself, how they can actually shape this. And where we can, we try to make it intergenerational in just the way that you're doing with this podcast, where there can be, not just an exchange of, oh, let me as the older person dispense wisdom to you, but like, what can I learn from younger people about new ways of organizing, communicating, and opening up people's imaginations the way Let's Talk is doing, right? And so we're really trying to cross a lot of lines that way.
Wow. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we completely agree with. It's learning about something and having that automatic reaction to take action. And that's what we've been, that's kind of the point of what we're doing. So, yeah, and you kind of touched on this too, but can you talk a little bit more about why citizenship and powerful citizenship more specifically is so important, and how do we see it and use it in our life?
Yeah. If you think about, here we are talking in year 2021, as we talk here right now, we're still in a country that's just beset by this pandemic. And the pandemic has laid bare a lot of uncomfortable realities and truths about our society. It's laid bare the fact that even though lots of people like to say we're all in it together, we're not all in it together. People are in a mode right now of, I'm going to get mine, I'm going to hold on to mine. And if you're suffering right now, tough luck, glad I'm not you, right? And that goes to our politics, it goes to the way people are engaging with each other, and it goes to this feeling of scarcity that was pre-existing in our society, right? Your generation knows better than any living Americans right now that we're living through a time of the greatest level of income and wealth inequality and concentration in this country's history since just before the Great Depression. We're living through a time of incredible existential crisis with the climate crisis. We're living through a time where, because your generation is waking up, it's forcing a lot of other people to reckon with a deep, deep history of racial injustice and white supremacy, right? You have all these things happening here on top of a culture, frankly, that even in the years since you've been alive, but certainly in the years that I've been alive, American culture has become so much more materialistic, hyper individualistic, kind of, disconnected. And everybody's just in their own little bubble, in their own little world, thinking about me, right? And that's the situation we have right now. And so with that context, like, our view is that unless you take affirmative steps to build civic muscle and build civic spirit, the natural default setting in American life is toward fragmentation, toward egoism, toward people just getting ever more shallow and forgetful of the past, and everybody thinking, that's not my problem as long as I'm taking care of number one, right? And I think one of the things that we've got to do together, and this is our spirit and our mission at Citizen University, is to remember that democracy only works if enough of us believe democracy works. Like, there's nothing magical or foreordained about democracy functioning or perpetuating itself. And I think the events of the insurrection on January 6th were a real stark reminder of that. Like, this thing can break. And there's no guarantee that it gets another round, it gets another generation, right? But when I say that democracy works only if enough of us believe democracy works, I don't mean to say to people, and especially to young people, like, you should believe harder. You should stop being so cynical, right? I don't mean that. I mean the system needs to earn your belief. The system needs to actually earn your trust and your faith. But my message is the way that the system can earn your trust and your faith is for you to show up into it, right? For you to claim it, for you to say, hey, if we start figuring out how to use our power and how to use our voice, how to circulate the privilege and the voice that we have, again, the way that you two are doing here, then we can actually awaken a sense of responsibility and belief that can become, I hesitate to use this word during COVID, but it can become contagious in a good way, right? Good things can be contagious too. And a sense of responsibility taking, we should be making that contagious, right? And so your generation's right on that kind of tipping point of, do we believe that? Or do we think that's all a bunch of BS and I'm going to check out? I'm going to check out and I'm going to go into my virtual reality. I'm going to go into my video game lane. I'm going to fall into my particular filter bubble and do my thing. It's super important for your generation to be, no, we're going to make that other choice. And what we're trying to do at Citizen University is to remind folks that that choice is necessary, that our culture is not self-renewing, our democracy is not self-executing. We've got to commit over and over again to each other to make it work.
Yeah. And then this question is more of a clarifying question, and you did touch on this a little, but we'd love to hear more. What does citizenship or a citizen mean in this country? Because right now it feels like people have really different opinions of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll say it again. I mean, in our work, in our name, Citizen University, our context is the United States. We are not, there are great organizations that you all are connected to, like Global Citizen, that are thinking transnationally and about problems and challenges that cross national borders. But we do operate in the United States. And yet, our conception of citizenship is not limited to people who are passport holding United States citizens. We mean it in this deeper ethical sense of, are you a part of the community? Are you a contributor? Are you somebody who leans in and says, there's no such thing as someone else's problem? At the end of the day, I got to take responsibility for holding up my part of the solution here. And I think when you understand citizenship that way, you begin to realize something in this time where there's been a lot of argument and debate in immigration politics and immigration policy, where you have all these folks who want to not only restrict immigration, but who want to restrict citizenship to a smaller and ever narrower group of people. And I would say that when you understand citizenship in this deep ethical sense that we're talking about, there are a lot of people in this country who lack the papers, but live like big citizens. And honestly, there are many, many more people who have the papers and do not. There are a lot of people who can say, I have a US passport, I'm a US citizen, just because, like me, they had the dumb luck to be born here in the United States, right? But they don't show up, they don't vote, they don't volunteer, they don't learn, they don't listen to people they disagree with, they don't serve in their community, they don't get engaged, right? And so, so much of what citizenship requires right now is that sense that, what it means to live like a citizen is not, based on the things that a lot of other countries base their identity on. We in the United States are a country bound together only by a creed, only by these words that are kind of cliche: liberty and justice for all, equal justice under law, right? All these words. And you can get cynical about those words until you remember that we are not of a common bloodline. We are not from a shared history on a shared piece of soil. We don't worship a single God, right? The only thing that unites us here is that creed. And the creed itself is an invitation not to consensus or unanimity. What actually unites us is that we are always arguing over the creed. We are always arguing over the meaning of liberty and justice and freedom and equality, right? And that's a great thing. But what it requires is that we need to actually understand what those words mean and not just repeat cheap slogans or silly memes or, go invade the capital of the United States and say, this is 1776. If you actually understood 1776, if you actually understood the revolution that begat this country, you'd be taking a whole lot more seriously the fragility of our institutions and your responsibility for holding them up, right? And so within the American context, how do we actually live up to the American promise? How do we live up to our creed? And how do we close the gap between our high ideals of our creed and the actual everyday practices of police brutality, of unequal schools, of a failing public health system, of so on and so forth? Closing that gap and closing that distance, that's citizenship. That's patriotism. That's showing up. And I think that's what we're trying to make more common across the country.
Yeah, and what do you think, like, what are the simple steps and just the important things that people, that global citizens, but specifically, like you've been saying in America, can do to close that gap? Like, what do people do?
Yeah, I think the first and most important thing is, I used the word earlier, get literate in power. When I say literate, like power, I'm not even speaking that metaphorically. Power is a language. Do you know how to read power? Do you know how to write power? Right? And so I would literally encourage anybody who's watching, especially younger people who are watching, think about your neighborhood, think about your school, and start just drawing a map of power where you live. Like, who runs this place? Who runs Seattle? Who runs this particular school or this neighborhood? And there's one layer of an answer, which is, well, the mayor and the city council. And then you get scraped beneath it. No. Who really runs? Like, who are the people who have influence? Who are the people with money who always get heard? Who are the people who are elders in a community who are respected, whether that's a faith community or a community of immigrants or a community, of African American churchgoers? Who are the elders? Who are the people who have kind of moral power in a community? Who are the people who know how to work a system and move ideas and social influence, who know how to activate the power of social media to change norms about what's normal and what's okay, right? And once you start drawing that map of power, you first of all begin to see, it's kind of like the movie The Matrix, like you see your community in a different light and things become revealed. But reading power is not enough. Then you got to actually start imagining what it would be like to rewrite or redraw that map. How could I insert myself into that? How could I get my voice heard as a young person at City Hall? What are some of the groups in town, whether that's Black Lives Matter or participatory budgeting projects or groups that are activating young people, the Sunrise Movement, groups that are activating young people to show up in different ways and put pressure on decision makers, right? So I think the first thing is learn power. And all of that learning of power is like the pulling of a thread or the peeling of an onion that starts with one question, which is this: who decides? Who decides, right? On pretty much anything you might ask. Who decides whether schools should be open or not during COVID? Who decides whether the minimum wage should be, $9, $11, $13, or $15 an hour? Who decides whether it's okay or not to not wear a mask, right? And on something like that, like, okay, there might be regulations from the public health department, but really mask wearing and not mask wearing is a matter of social norms. Like, you all decide as influencers, like when you see people not wearing masks, like, hey, that's not okay. Come on, stop being that way. But if you live in a place where you'd feel shunned if you said that, then you realize, oh, someone else is deciding here. Someone else is setting a different kind of norm that's unhealthy, but it's hard to break, right? And I think that learning about power is one of the most important things to do. And then, as I said at the outset, after you do that, think about how you convert that learning about power into ways that are not just for you, not just for yourself or those like you, but how do you circulate that in a way that can be for the good of the community?
Yeah, wow. And staying within the realm of learning, as someone who created a university, what do you think about the education system in this country right now? And what is working and what really needs to change?
There's so much that needs to change in our education system. I'm the product of public schools. I'm a former Seattle public school parent. My daughter's in college now, but I've co-chaired school levies in Seattle. I'm a big believer in public education. At the same time, I think our public education system has a couple of big structural problems that it's got to learn to reckon with. One, of course, is just inequality and racial inequity, and that's a challenge. And I think how the district can be more inclusive of families who don't have voice or clout in our city, to ensure that the children of those families get a quality education and a fair shot. That's task number one. But the second thing I would say, honestly, part of where we are in the country right now is the consequence of the fact that for over a generation, probably 4 or 5 decades now, our schools have stopped teaching civics, either effectively or at all. And one of the things that this moment in American history is showing us is you stop teaching a generation or two, civics, by which I mean not only how a bill becomes a law and the stuff that you might sing a song about, but just literally like, what is power? How does money and social media influence public life? How do we deal with our history and face our past together? All of these things that you need to learn about how to live in community. When you have a couple of generations where no kids have been taught that, then you get the political culture we have today. A Twitter culture, a culture of conspiracy theory, short-term thinking, no historical memory, no common knowledge, no trust of each other. And so I think our schools have to dial it up, by an order of magnitude, the amount that they're focusing on teaching civics and teaching people to be participants in democracy. We forget the whole point behind free compulsory public education back in the 1800s wasn't to make good workers, right? Today, the people you hear as the loudest champions of education reform are corporations because they want smarter, more skilled workers. And great, God bless them for wanting more skilled workers. But that wasn't the point. The point of free compulsory public education 2 centuries ago was to make citizens, was to make a people who were capable of self-government and knowing themselves, knowing their own minds, being able to deal with diverse communities and listen and learn from people unlike yourself. And those habits don't just fall out of the sky. They have to be cultivated. And our schools have been failing to do that for a really long time. Well, I'll tell you, we are launching a new program right now, actually, at Citizen University. It's called Citizen Redefined. And what it is a program of and by and for young people, high school students, who will be forming in circles, guided by an elder over a period of weeks and months in an arc of kind of moral and civic formation. So if you think about, again, in a religious context, church confirmations or bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, in a Jewish tradition, this is like a civic confirmation process where over many weeks, young people are forming up and they're not only learning about current events, but actually like in a place that is safe, asking each other hard moral questions like, what would you do in this situation? You see somebody handling this, you see somebody hoarding resource in a way that doesn't seem cool, or you see somebody kind of boxing out someone from a disfavored group. Do you say something? How do you show up? What are we supposed to do as young people right now? And we're creating these circles in ways where it's possible for people your age and younger to be shaping each other together, again, with the guidance and input of some elders, but it's really about how you all find your own moral compass and chart a path to that kind of formation as citizens. So, I just think we're doing our part that way, but I think everybody has to take a page from you two and think, if I have a little bit of curiosity and interest, like I got to follow up on that with motivation and join a circle, find a club, create a podcast, listen to a podcast, take away of not just letting that recede to, oh, well, I'll look up that thing tomorrow and then never return to it, right? Just like choose to show up now.
Yeah, and showing up now. And I think that, at a young age, it's so important because it really forms your mentality and your ideas on what's going on for the rest of your life. So thank you so much, Eric, for sharing with us today and having this conversation. And now that the conversation's over, as always, it's time to take action and ensure that we are all being good citizens. So you can sign up at their website that we will link for their newsletter and learn ways to get involved. And you can also sign up to attend one of their civic Sundays that he was talking about, which are being held virtually at the moment. And they have several civic fellows around the US so that you can connect with someone in your community locally. And then if you're interested in leading a civic Sunday of your own, we'll link that too. And then finally, for whoever will be juniors in high school in the fall, you can sign up on their interest list to learn more about their youth collaboratory. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, applications will be opening in the spring. So that's so great and awesome. So thank you so much. It was so good meeting you.
Olivia and Layla, thank you so much for having me and for doing this, and keep on leading by example and keep on learning the way you're learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.